Okay, welcome back. Let's expand the conversation. Let's broaden this conversation somewhat. If you look at what we've gone through in the last year, right, it's been, to put it mildly, an interesting year. And as we grapple with all the change that came our way, technology has been quite at the center of it all. If you look at some of the things that we've had to deal with, right? We went from discussions at the water cooler to virtual coffee breaks. There's been this debate about, is technology, are we using technology for, do we prioritize privacy, or do we overweight to convenience? Do we drive for greater automation in our systems, or should we focus on job creation? And can we do both, right? And even in terms of dealing with the pandemic specifically, technology is helping us accelerate the production of vaccines, but pretty much the same stuff is what we use for biological warfare, right? So this whole question about how do we use technology and whether technology can be used as a force for good, that's the idea we want to talk about over the next 40 minutes. And we put together a pretty diverse panel for this discussion. So let me go around the room, do a quick introduction. Dr. Sunita Maheshwari, Chief Dream and Loop Closer at Teleradiology Solutions and Telerad Tech. Suniti Goel, engineer at the Center for Railway Information Systems, and Shamik Chakravarti, founder and CEO at Farmizen. Welcome to Nirman, all of you. Wonderful to have you join us on this panel, and I'm sure the audience will enjoy the discussion. So looking forward to it. So let me kick things off. Just to, the way we'll do this is just to give you a sense of what each of you do in terms of what your work is focused on, just to give people a little bit more color to where you come from. So to start with, Dr. Maheshwari.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pradeep. Lovely to be here. So I'm a pediatric cardiologist, a cardiologist for children. So I've always used technology in my field because we do interventions in the cath lab and so on. But I'm also an entrepreneur running a teleradiology company, which essentially gives reports of CT scans, MRIs, X-rays to hospitals and centers around the world. US night shift, India daytime, but also to places in Africa, the Maldives, between healthcare and technology and using both.
Excellent. Over to you, Ms. Goel.
Yeah, thank you, Pradeep. It gives me a lot of pleasure to be part of this panel discussion. I am, as you have already mentioned, I am working in CRIS, and I am a senior system design and analyst and architect for railways softwares. I passed out of Delhi College of Engineering in 1988 as an electrical engineer. Due to my interest in computer science, I made a switch from electrical to computers. And within 4 months of my first job in HCL, I started working in computers. Then due to my luck, I got a chance to work in CRIS. And since then, I'm continuing in CRIS. CRIS is an internal organization of Indian Railways, which is specifically created for IT implementation across all domains of Indian Railways. Indian Railways has always been a pioneer in adopting IT in India, and CRIS has been a big support in doing the same. The journey of CRIS started by digitizing business processes of Indian Railways, be it citizen-centric services or internal processes. So my main focus area has been passenger reservation system, the ticketing system which everyone is being using. The irctc.co.in website has been developed by CRIS, and it has been upgraded by CRIS. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Goel. And over to you, Shamik.
Hi, Pradeep and fellow panelists. Thank you so much for having me here. Really happy. So I run a company called Farmizen. We started this in 2017, and it's been a very interesting journey so far because we basically are a farm-to-fork marketplace, right? Where we connect farmers to consumers directly and try to get out of the way as much as possible, right? Now, while building this, the interesting thing was that it really needed us to understand farming, and I had no farming background whatsoever, right? Have been a city-bred person all throughout my life, worked for Amazon, Yahoo, Juniper Networks, all of these tech guys. And then I think it was a huge learning to see how tech can actually be made to be usable by people who are not so used to tech, namely farmers, right? So I'll probably share a few snippets of that during this conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a good segue into, you came over from this side dealing with tech, selling tech, building tech, to working with people who are probably not the first people that come to mind in terms of users, right? So how did you see that journey, that transition?
Yeah, so I think a couple of aspects to that, right? So one is we were engineers ourselves. So I mean, I think when we launched, we underestimated what is required from an adoption perspective. So adoption of technology is not just about how simple you have made it, but there are certain social issues around it as well, right? So just to give you an example, so farming essentially is a very social profession, unlike most other professions, in the sense when a farmer tries out a new thing, picks up a new technology, is trying it out, then the entire village comes to his farm and they observe it, right? And they also talk about it regularly, like their village meetings, they'll be talking about it and stuff like that. So one of the things that we learned very quickly was that we need to get the entire community involved, right? You cannot just go and approach a farmer, because then he will face a lot of questions from his village, etc. We need to, ideally, a better go-to market is probably where you do a meeting with the panchayat and all of those other guys, so that everybody is kind of comfortable. Okay, this is new, and they come in from a supportive mindset, right? So this is one aspect. The second aspect that we saw was we should also not underestimate the ability to learn that rural India has, right? And if you see, for example, the way folks use WhatsApp in rural India, a lot of folks who are not literate, they use WhatsApp purely for just sending voice messages. So they would be in WhatsApp groups, there would be village level WhatsApp groups, and they'll basically record voice messages and send it across, because maybe half of the folks there don't know it. So once you give a tool to people, people figure out alternate uses or different ways of doing that. So we were very worried initially, because one of the aspects of our business requires the farmer to use an app. So consumers have an app, but the farmers also have an app. And obviously we had initial concerns around, okay, will farmers have smartphones, for example? So that fortunately has got solved a lot in the last couple of years. Ever since Jio has launched, smartphone penetration has increased substantially in rural India, right? So that we did not face too much of a problem. Second thing was, would people with fruit farmers be comfortable using apps and stuff? So what we saw was that people figure it out, right? We made the app very simple to use. We used a lot of big symbols and graphics, etc. in it, right? So that it's kind of, you don't have to read text to kind of try and use it. So we did do that, but what we saw was that people teach each other, right? So let's say the farmer does not know how to read or write any languages, but he has maybe a 10, 12-year-old daughter who goes to school, right? So she would teach him how to use the thing, right? So our user whom we would be interacting with would be the daughter, where we would train her, this is how you use it, right? And she would in turn go and teach the family, right? So I think a lot of such interesting things we saw when we kind of tried to bring technology into people who are not so used to it. I mean, people figure out how to use stuff if they see that there is value to it.
So is this something that evolved over a period of time, or did you actually do some work before you started designing your app, or was it an iterative process as you put something
so it
out?
was definitely it was definitely an iterative process. In fact, the way we started Farmizon was from scratching a personal itch, right? So what happened was that I was growing my own food on my terrace, right? And we never had enough space to grow my own food. Okay. And then we said, okay, there are a lot of farmers near where I stay in Whitefield, about 2-3 kilometers away. And we said, can we go and, talk to some of them and maybe just get a patch of land? And we are going to go there every few days and try to grow our own food, right? We'll basically rent it out. So we found such a farmer. We took a small 25 feet by 25 feet patch of land, and we started growing our own food. Initially, we were very ambitious, so we started doing everything ourselves. We would go there every alternate day, remove weeds, and we just asked the farmer that please just water it every alternate day, right? Okay. Now, after some time, of course, we realized that we need more help because it's a lot of effort. This is something that we don't realize when we talk about farming, there is just way too much effort that goes in, right? I mean, just removing weed from a 25 feet by 25 feet patch of land used to take us like 3 hours, right? I mean, it's unimaginable. So, so we were building this as our own hobby, right? And then what we saw was we started getting a lot of produce out at that small patch of land. And a lot of our friends started getting interested in it, friends and colleagues. So we thought, let's commercialize this, right? And that was our entry into this entire thing. And when we were thinking of, okay, how do we commercialize this? We realized that there were a few blockages for this to scale. One was people in Bangalore all come from different parts of the country, right? Farmers speak different languages. Somebody from Delhi would not know how to speak in Kannada or Tamil, etc., right? So how do you bridge this communication between farmers and consumers using that? That's actually a key role that our farmer app plays. So when we launched with one app for the consumer, one app for the farmer. But of course, there was a lot of learnings which went in. We had made things too complex. There were several iterations. Our business model also went into multiple iterations. We had started off with this renting a mini farm and have a farmer help you grow your food. And then now that's one of the pieces of what we offer. We have basically evolved into a farm to fork marketplace where farmers can offer subscriptions to their farm. Farmers can sell their fruits, sell their vegetables and all sorts of stuff. So various different type of transactions we have enabled between farmers and consumers right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Ms. Goel, switching to you, are there any parallels that you draw? Because irctc.co.in is probably one of the most used websites in the country, right? And a lot of very diverse spectrum of people use it, right? With you would argue a very different set of skills. So any parallels there that you see in how you build systems at scale for India for passenger reservations?
Yeah, like we had also, like if we talk about railway reservation system, it has gone into multiple iterations. It started in 1985. If you remember, at that time there used to be manual registers, where people could book ticket only from their originating stations, and they had for return ticket it was a big challenge. Then railway began solving this problem and they computerized it. And at that time also the computerized system could give tickets only from a particular station. Then this system was replaced by a totally network system where the people could buy ticket from a single window from anywhere to anywhere. In year 2000, when Google was in infancy, the Indian Railways came up with the website, where all the reservation information was available online. And people also, they started their e-ticketing also. So people could book tickets sitting at home. So with penetration of this internet, the website was replaced with a new website, which is the next generation e-ticketing system, which was developed by Chris. And multiple new technologies were used in this system, so that it could scale. And it was a big challenge. So now almost we book about 26,000 tickets per day, and more than 5 lakh concurrent users come on our website at time of Tatkal booking, which is a quota which is released one day prior to the journey.
Yes. So fascinating. But in terms of, some of the things that Shamik talked about, right? I mean, how did users learn to use the system as you started addressing people that had probably never booked tickets online? These were probably the first of its kind experiences for many of your users.
People started using the website, and it was the UI also was made user friendly. And some people used, people who were not very friendly with the computers, they used agents. There were agents also, which used to book, authorized agents which can book their ticket online. And the mobile devices, when the mobile devices came, so the we switched over to mobile apps. And what we see, when the mobile app were successfully launched, about 50% of the booking was being done through mobile apps.
Okay.
So people were using a lot of mobile apps.
So let me just talk about one interesting anecdote which this Suniti kind of reminded me, right? So I was doing my undergrads 97 to 2001, okay, in Pilani, which is about 6 hours journey from Delhi, right? So obviously after every semester, we had to all go back home, right? And the originating station there was Delhi, because Pilani wasn't really connected by train, right? So we used to basically have to travel to Delhi, and from Delhi take a train and go back to all different parts of India, South India, East India, North India. So one of the huge massive exercises that used to happen every every semester was essentially how do we get tickets booked for all of the students there, right? Because this system was not there then. And what Suniti was mentioning about the originating station, right? That you had to book it from the originating station. It was such a pain point because the originating station was Delhi. So we used to actually collect. So I was part of the students union there. So we used to like have these huge queues and collect all of this information from everybody. When is your last exam? When are you leaving from Delhi? And then we used to go to Delhi physically, right? So like 7-10 of us, that was the whole job of student union. We would go to Delhi and you basically stand there for 2 days in a queue, right? And we would book tickets for every individual, pay cash, book tickets, pay cash, book tickets. So for 2 days, we would book tickets for the entire 2,000 people in the college, right? And then would come back with the tickets and we'd go ahead and distribute it. Right. So when we say that technology can be a enabler for good, yes, a lot of personal good has come up for people like us, who are part of student activities.
And this is a story you probably have heard multiple times in various shapes and forms, right? So switching to you, Dr. Maheshwari, telemedicine again, it's probably an idea that has been in the works for a long time, but with what happened with this enforced, remote or lockdown that we went through last year, it became an idea whose time had finally come, right? Your experience, how that panned out?
Yeah, I think, most doctors, don't really like tech or hadn't in the past. Okay. But that has changed dramatically. The new gen has all grown up on iPads and phones. So I think telemedicine was an idea waiting to happen in India. But there were certain legal constraints in our country, unlike in the US where telemedicine has been around for 10 years. In India, it was done, with the ISRO satellite and satellite connectivity and that kind of telemedicine. But the patient still had to go to a center, and then that center was connected up by telemedicine. So instead of Shamik, going to Delhi to buy tickets, it would be a patient going to their rural center that had some connectivity to a doctor somewhere else who was also sitting at a center. So it was very much, place-to-place connectivity. And it still involved the patient and the doctor sitting in a certain location. Now, the rules regarding telemedicine, of course, with COVID, March 25th, Government of India legalized telemedicine in India. And that immediately changed it was a complete game changer for telemedicine because along with that legalization, there were also all the new apps and, all the IIT and the BITS guys out there who had already developed technology, which was just waiting to be able to be utilized. And then there was the lockdown. So nobody could go to a clinic and nobody could go to a telemedicine center. So very rapidly, it became that doctors were able to work from home in their pajamas, like the rest of the IT world. They could also just put on their shirt and, be in front of a camera, and there they were. And similarly for patients, they had to very quickly, learn how to access and use that technology to be able to access medical care. So I think COVID really jump-started the whole thing. But, to take off from where, Shamik was talking about farmers, it's sort of the same in telemedicine. It's not like we've tried different apps and everyone's complaining about how this doesn't work and that didn't work. And the doctor's face froze in the middle of my consultation, or the storage wasn't enough and my records got lost. So there are, and they continue to be teething problems in the tech we use. Now, one of the things we did during this time is we deployed for Apollo Tyres. They actually they had these physical, telemedicine centers across the country. In 20 states, there are 30 telemedicine centers where they're like the old telemedicine, where the community could go. Now, we deployed what's called a nurse-assisted telemedicine for them, where there's a nurse and then she helps. So like what Shamik was saying, the 4th standard student, helping her dad, the nurse would essentially help them with using this tech. And for another painter community, for about 2 lakh painter communities, we did telemedicine for them, but we realized then they're all over the country. And you can't ask them, okay, now go to that nurse-assisted center. So we said, okay, use your mobile phone. And one of the things we learned was they were calling us and speaking in Marathi, and then Hindi and Oriya. And our call center here was press 1 to speak to a doctor, press 2 for pharmacy. I mean, we were totally out of sync with what the needs were of this community we were serving. And I think a lot of times, even us docs, we want to do good, the whole community, but figuring out their needs. So now we have a Hindi mein press karna hai to do karo, Kannada mein, and then Kannada nalli moodu. And so a lot of language, different languages that they can access the docs in. And then we had to put together a panel of doctors who speak multiple languages. So it can't just be the Kannada or Hindi speaking, someone who speaks Marathi, someone who speaks Tamil, if you want to, be able to do telemedicine. So I think the one piece was making the tech very usable. And the second piece was adapting it to community needs in a way that they could use it very well and efficiently.
So the community is something that keeps coming up as a recurring thread in all of your experiences. But specifically on telemedicine, was there also a lot of training and enablement that you need to do, or did people kind of intuitively learn as they used it? I mean, how big, and it's something that would be applicable to all of you. I mean, did as you put technology out there, did you actually do things to train how people consume that technology, or was it more people kind of learned as they went along?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think if the technology is intuitive, there's not much training needed. And I think the telemedicine that happened in India this past year, one was, all the kind of VC, PE funded guys who had like a huge tech group, and they had these beautiful apps where you could book your appointment, you could pay online, you could see your doctor, your records were there. And a lot of those apps were somewhat intuitive, though our experience has been that most of them have some glitch or the other still, perhaps because it's so new. Now, so I think from a patient end, if you know how to use apps on your phone, on your laptop, it's a fairly, easy, you can easily then figure out how to see your doc. From our end, we found we had to do a fair amount of training for the doctors, for the people who book the appointments, who weren't used to using it. Plus, they have to get efficient, because like a doc, say he has to do 30 patients a day, he better be efficient. For a patient, he may be only doing one consultation a month. So even if he's putzing around for half an hour, it's okay. Whereas a doctor, if he's putzing around for half an hour for each consult, he would say, I'm not using this technology. So there was training at the medical end that was needed. And also our finding was that patients, even though they now had access to doctors around the country and world in a sense, right? It became very egalitarian. You could access a doctor in Dehradun or a doctor in, Paris, because everybody now was online. Patients still interestingly wanted their own doc. So then, that training for us, say, for instance, at RxDX, to tell our patients that, hey, we are online. Our docs are available online. But then to ensure that our doctors were actually, scheduled right, available on the app. So when a patient went looking for them, they would actually find the doc they wanted. So certainly training, I think, plays a big role. I think a lot of times when you roll out, for instance, we just started doing vaccinations at our clinics yesterday. But the training has been going on all week on the CoWIN app, on the whole process. So there's a huge component even in healthcare technology usage. And the more, an entity trains and is ready to train, the more successful they'll be at getting both the end users to use it as well as the, the people who are delivering the care.
And I think there's one workaround that is often used to kind of get around this whole onboarding problem of doing a new app, etc., is to kind of do a gentle entrance or go-to market with something that the audience is already familiar with, like a WhatsApp, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of startups, etc., nowadays they're saying, hey, we'll build an app, but later, let's just use WhatsApp APIs, right? WhatsApp has been gradually opening up APIs, etc., and we'll just create an experience on WhatsApp itself, right? You send a message to WhatsApp and then you select put in one or ek dabaiye to get connected to a doctor or whatever, right? And maybe perhaps do a video call on WhatsApp itself. So I think some startups are trying these sort of methods, which are also very interesting because that
make it
reduces
simple.
the entry barrier for new people to try out the system or the hesitation.
And it's interesting because both of you are your tech is relatively new, and this is new stuff that you're dealing with. And Ms. Goel, as far as the passenger reservation systems, Chris, it goes back years, right? So you've seen multiple stages of this evolution. So in your experience, especially recently, are these things that are relevant to you too in terms of making sure adoption or ease of use or training is something that that you were able to do better with some of these capabilities that are available now?
Yeah, I think the most important is ease of use and the minimum time which is required to book a ticket on the website. Basically, our aim has always been enhancing customer experience. Recently, also we have launched a new UI for e-ticketing website and also for the mobile apps. So the basic thing is the UI has to be intuitive and simple. That is the main focus. We do not, that like training is not at the user end, training is not done, but we always have some documents and user manuals and those kind of videos for training.
Okay. And is that very different? Just broadening the conversation a little bit more. You also need a supportive ecosystem to be able to do that. I mean, Dr. Maheshwari, you mentioned how doctors collect money, right? I mean, earlier you would be there physically. Shamik, when you talk about the enabling circumstances that the ecosystem brings about, and the government, the framework that you have to operate, are those things changing where these initiatives that you're doing to make technology work for good? Do you have the enabling ecosystem to make that possible, or are there changes that you'd like to see?
I can take that. I think it's much easier today. For doctors, traditionally, telemedicine has basically been free consultations. A patient calling you up and asking an opinion, and you give the opinion. Okay. Today, doctors, hospitals are able to somewhat monetize it because you've got the e-payment gateways and credit card gateways and so on. So there's that ecosystem. Secondly, you have much better, the whole encryption, the safety. Well, to whatever extent you can. Because that's one issue patients are always worried about, even with WhatsApp, and we try and, of course, with all the controversies today. Yes. But I think the fact that we've got some data protection laws, some security systems, some frameworks in our country, that's also made it easier for patients to accept that I can, have a telemedicine consultation. And of course, being in India, which is like a tech hub, I don't think telemedicine, telehealth would have taken off if we didn't have all the engineers and the IT guys and the software people who knew how to build it, because that's something the medical people can use, but they don't, and they can give ideas on how it should be, but they don't have the know-how to build it out. So I think that combination of, having payment gateways online today, having good tech and engineering support, and then having, a medical community who's open to it, and then having the population who's open to using it. It's a perfect combination now for new technologies to come in and be used to do good all over the country.
And is it also the case that in India, the consumer is overweighted towards convenience, doesn't care so much for privacy and security and all of those, or is that a misnomer? Or because that's kind of the popular belief here that these things are more a Western concept. Here, people really don't care about that. In your experiences and in each of your areas, is that something that people really understand and prioritize?
I think it depends, Pradeep. I mean, we get sometimes really nasty emails from people saying, my report was shared on this group email, and that's like an invasion of my privacy. So you get that. On the other hand, you do get a lot of patients who are like not even thinking about it. That's, top of mind for them is their healthcare, or, that they're getting the right meds, or it's the right doc. And anyway, in India, traditionally, like when you have a consultation, you'll have 10 family members in the room. I mean, it's not very private. If you see visiting rooms, you have one patient admitted, there 40 people outside and everybody discussing their disease. So I don't think that kind of, we are not very kind of individualistically private about a lot of our things. So you're right. I think culturally, at least as a doc, I see 99% really don't care because they're bringing in 5 people anyway with them to discuss things.
Sure.
But having said that, it's something we need to, consider and keep in mind, especially as digital gets more widespread, and it's better we plan for those things today because we're going to have more and more people who worry about it and it becomes part of the dialogue.
Right.
So we should be future ready with it, I would say for sure.
And so you could argue that, even when your users are not asking for it, is that something that you're already thinking of? Because there are larger issues that might not be relevant to the individual, but at scale they might impact us as a society, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, for instance, we do teleradiology, and for the last 15 years, I mean, we've made sure we have 128-bit encryption. The images are encrypted when they come. The patient identifiers are removed because this is, it may just seem like, oh, there's never going to be a breach, but you have 200 patients or whose, cancer diagnosis is leaked out to people. They didn't want their employers to know, whatever, I think it behooves us to be responsible with it. So I think as providers, as technology builders, we need to be thinking of those things, even if the patient, across the table isn't necessarily specifically asking for it. And we need to build those into our systems. It's something we think about in our organizations. For instance, as I said, we are HIPAA compliant, which is the Portability and Security Act. So we do, a lot of things within it. So when that becomes mandatory, we're already ready. So I think for organizations involved with technology, that's important to think about. So you're ready before somebody has asked you to be ready. Knowing the future is very important, because these rules and laws are going to come into place. And it's only fair, I think, to patients, to people, that their data be protected and be their own.
I think consumer opinion also changes very, very fast nowadays, right? I mean, if you had asked me this same question maybe a month back, I would have told you, no, consumers in India don't really care about privacy. But look what has been happening in the last, 1 or 2 weeks about this whole WhatsApp imbroglio, right? Everybody seems to care. I mean, it's almost like my old aunt is also asking me, hey, should I leave WhatsApp and should I go to some of these other apps? Looks like there is a privacy issue. I'm like, wow, okay, wonderful. So I think things change very rapidly in today's world. So we should be prepared and do the right thing, essentially.
That's fascinating. So it's a great discussion, but I want to kind of, looking at the audience that would be listening to you, each of you have kind of built, chase your dream, build something that is very unique. So in terms of, if I could ask for a couple of pieces of advice that you would give to your younger selves, if you were able to, I mean, if you were starting your career, maybe, and some of you are not that old, as I am, but, if you were looking
you don't know that.
If you were looking at your career, maybe 20 years back, what advice would you give your younger self if you could do that? So we'll start with you, Shamik, and then we'll go around the room.
So I think so. This is the second company that I'm doing as an entrepreneur, right? So this is my second entrepreneurial adventure, and I think one of the things I would strongly suggest folks, especially those who are looking at entrepreneurship as a career, to start as early as possible, because the earlier you start, the more risks you can take, the more aggressive you can become, right? Because you just have much less opportunity costs, right? The later in your career you try it, your chances of succeeding are probably higher because of the networks you have built, the understanding that you have built, but your opportunity cost is also significantly higher. So try and start earlier if possible, because you don't have to worry about too many different things. So that's number one. And I think the number two thing, always have a co-founder if you're starting. I mean, creating a business from scratch and then running it can be very tough, and there can be a lot of related mental health issues, etc., that can come up, right? Because it's a tough thing to do, right? So if you're doing that, better have 1 or 2 more people in the journey. Don't try to take it on your own. These are I think the 2 pieces of advice that I would give to people.
What about you, Ms. Goel?
I would like to give them the advice, like they should, people should be committed towards their work and they should give their 100% and maintain the focus. Like Arjun, they should have focus on what they want to do. And the other advice would be like they should adopt the new technologies as they are coming, and try to see where they can be used to improve their system. and they continuously improve their system so that it is more usable.
So adopt new technology, be open to the new things that are coming through.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What about you, Dr. Maheshwari? What would you suggest?
Well, I think I'm a very boring entrepreneur, never took funding by choice. We've very organically grown, took our money and reinvested it started with teleradiology, invested those profits into building one clinic at RxDX, then profits of RxDX to build its second clinic. So I would say that's an approach I've enjoyed. And I know in today's world, a lot of it is about, quick VC funding. How can I grow? How can I sell? But, if you're, as an entrepreneur, for me, having taken an idea and built it out over 10, 15 years, I mean, being patient and enjoying that journey really along the way, and not looking necessarily at entrepreneurship as a way to kind of build an exit, but entrepreneurship as a way to create an impact, to create more jobs, to do things that make an impact for the communities around us. I think then, the joy of entrepreneurship, lasts forever. So like we had this HR guy who joined us, and we are not a startup anymore. I mean, we are not. We were, 700 employees and, God bless, EBITDA positive and sustainable. And this guy who joined us, he walks into my room and he says, it feels like a 15-year-old startup. So I said, I don't know if that's a compliment or a criticism. Are we so discombobulated, So I think keeping that excitement, and that comes from, of having clarity of why you're doing it. And if we can have, entrepreneurs who are doing it because they believe in the idea, they're passionate about it, they want to grow it, they want to give jobs, but they also want to use those profits for social good and for impact, then that is the entrepreneurial journey that one would, always enjoy. You can always look back and, have a lot of, and I think as Shamik said, start young. I think one thing, if I had to tell myself, maybe I would have moved faster. We were in telemedicine before it became legal. Maybe we should have had those apps ready and taken a little bit of funding and, been ready to really scale. So maybe, I have the opposite thing, that perhaps we could have moved faster because we actually saw the future 10 years ago. So, sometimes my approach of very slow, organic gets you to you feel it's a good position, but perhaps some speed, some agility in the system would have definitely helped me move much further ahead than I am today.
Maybe you'd have taken a different set of trade-offs as it were.
Yeah. Maybe, yes.
Okay, fascinating discussion. We're coming to the end of our time. Here's what I'm taking away from all of your experiences. As you build tech for good, a key lever seems to be, how do you make it social? How do you get the community involved? It takes a village, right? I mean, and in some cases, literally, it meant quite that. So it's not just the individual, but in India especially, the community is critical. The other thing that seems to have come through in all of your instances is that mobile, right? And what is possible with mobile is being a game changer. It's completely changed the landscape in which you can operate. I mean, many of your users are experiencing the internet not on laptops and desktops as some of us older people did, but their first experiences is on mobile, and that changes things. And this thing about using the ecosystem, using existing frameworks, platforms to leapfrog to where you want to be, that's again something that people can think of. And of course, the linguistic diversity of India is something that you have to plan for and you have to think about. So, how do you make your tech consumable in different languages? And to summarize some of the ideas that came through, in terms of advice that you would offer to some of the people listening in, start early, have a co-founder, eye on the prize, keep the commitment, that focus on what you want to get done, be open to new ideas and new thinking, be ready to be agile and change. And lastly, build for the long term, not for the exit, so to speak. And, provide, have clarity on the why, not just the what. The what is, but that sense of purpose in terms of, that will give you that North Star to keep you focused on what you want to do. So that's what I took away. Fantastic set of ideas and learnings for all of us. So once again, thank you for the panel, to the panel for taking your time and sharing your thoughts, your journey with all of us here. So on behalf of all of us here at Nirman, thank you, and look forward to continuing the conversation offline. Once again, thanks to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so
very
much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.